Real Digital Humans.
Hi, this is Stefan Albert, and you're on the Real Digital Humans podcast, sponsored by Asia. And today we have a special guest, Evelyn Palma. Evelyn has a lot of experience in headhunting. She's actually worked with one of the top headhunting firms and has now moved into her own Blackbird recruitment company. But even more exciting, and this is how we actually got to meet, Evelyn has created a new startup called Equally, trying to actually completely remove CVs from the whole hiring process. So with that said, Evelyn, I'm going to pass over to you. Maybe you can share a little bit more about your background and a little bit more about this Equally company, because I think it sounds fascinating.
Yes, thank you so much, Stefan, for the intro. And absolutely, you're right. I have more than a decade of experience in recruitment, worked for one of the main recruitment firms for many years, and decided to venture on my own with Blackbird, together with a co-founder. And then after a while, it's something that I've been always very passionate about, and it's about working towards creating more equal opportunities. I believe that the recruitment in general is very flawed as a process. So I came up with the idea for Equally, which is still, I would say, work in progress. It's a very early startup still, but working towards basically removing the CVs completely from the recruitment process, because I believe that's one of the main starting points of the issues that we have in recruitment, and moving towards a more fair recruitment process if possible.
Now, it sounds a little bit strange in the sense you always think, okay, a CV should be an unbiased presentation of a human being. So why do you believe a CV is either inadequate or downright problematic?
There are many things. So, I mean, candidates are being basically judged by many different things, right? It can be anything from a certain education. It can even go as far as a certain university. They can be very, very specific. Also, when you have people maybe having gaps on their CV, they can sometimes be discriminated based on that gap, or they had a career break for whatever reason. And many of them don't even get an opportunity then to present themselves and what they bring to the table. So there's a lot of factors. I mean, it's a known fact that the discrimination goes with names, with pictures, with the backgrounds. I mean, there's so many aspects that are proven by many studies that we are, in fact, discriminating people from a CV point of view based on many factors. And I would say, if I did to go into Switzerland specifically, where the picture and actually a lot of personal information goes into a CV, for me, when I came, I felt it was a lot of irrelevant information, because that doesn't really say anything about what the person is capable of doing. And I've seen a lot of frustration.
How many kids they have, things like that.
Correct. Right. It doesn't define, I believe, a professional. It adds to you as a person for sure, but I don't think it defines whether you can do the job better or not. So, and I've felt a lot of frustration from candidates. I mean, I've been a candidate myself at some point in my career too. So I fully get the frustrations of the recruitment process, and I've seen discrimination happen over and over again. I mean, it can be from someone. I mean, I had a client that, a lady, 32-year-old, married. Okay, will she get pregnant? Can you ask? No, I cannot ask that. But having that, again, predefined discrimination factor of, hey, this person will go on maternity leave, right? So there's many, many things, age, again, civil status, a lot of things that I don't believe are relevant, to be honest, to someone's career history and their skill set and the value they bring us as people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, very interesting, very good points. Couldn't I just say, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, I'm a company, I don't really care about that, because I know if I hire people, that have ticked all the boxes and are safe, I'm going to get a much better candidate than if I start just getting anybody, and it's better for me and it's better for the company. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that's what most companies believe, right? And it's also the safer card to play. And this is also why we have all this discrimination happening, because you want to basically have that perfect CV, but the perfect CV is not always the perfect candidate for the company. And I've seen it many times when they have hired the right profile in a way, but turn out to not be a fit to the company, to what they want to do. The candidate might also not like the culture, the company, and so on. So there's so much more that goes into the recruitment and having a successful recruitment than just matching a profile to a job description or matching a specific profile need. And I think when we talk also about diversity in the workplace, when companies hire more of the same all the time, and I've seen it when you really have, I don't know, everyone in the finance team are ex-Big Fours, and hey, great, and they're great professionals, but bringing someone without a Big Four background might actually also bring additional value add to the team.
Yeah.
So I think we're very
Mhm.
stuck many times in finding what has worked or what we believe will work from a profile point of view. And we're missing out on really, really people that can bring a lot of value to the company, to the team, with new ideas, with other points of view. But yeah, you're right. I mean, in general, and that's where I would say the easier path is always to try to find the perfect matching. But I think that's honestly one of the reasons why the recruitment process is flawed to a certain degree as well, because we have that some kind of obsession with the perfect profile, and we really miss out on a lot of great people that can bring a lot to the table that maybe don't have the perfect CV in that sense. So
Yeah.
I really believe
Agree.
that there's a lot of work to be done from that angle.
Yeah, and I think one thing that always struck me is I remember I was once in an interview process, and they were like, we're really confident because we always choose the right people, and the people we choose are always good. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think sort of back to statistics. You sort of have this type 1, type 2 error. Type 1 error. Are you like, when you say somebody is good, are they good? So that's and how often are you wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And the type 2 error is, how many great people did you not accept because you sort of like threw the baby out with the bathwater? And it made me think, well, I mean, that is maybe an issue. It's an issue for the candidate, obviously, if they don't happen to tick all the boxes. And it made me think, well, what's in it for the company to not do that sort of highly selective, highly risk averse process? And the one thing that came to mind is you then start pulling from a very small pool. So if you
Correct.
wipe out 95% of the candidates because they haven't been to the top university and the top companies beforehand and have no gaps in their CVs, etc., you're going to end up with some pretty boring candidates that are probably really expensive. And there's a cost factor there as well. You might, and an excitement factor and a willingness to
Mm-hmm.
stay. You might find that, yes, of course they are good at their job and they've proven that, but maybe they're not willing to stay that long, and maybe they get lots of other offers, and maybe they want 20, 30, 50% more than another candidate who is maybe just as good but doesn't tick all the boxes.
I fully agree, and that's a great point, because it's a fact that we have a talent shortage in the market, and I've said it many times. I don't believe there is a shortage of talent. I believe there's a lack of how we are looking at talent. Right. So you're completely right. When we focus so much and we put the emphasis on a specific profile, we're missing out on a huge portion of talent that is out there. And what I have seen, the times that I managed to convince clients to maybe interview someone that on paper was not something that someone that they wouldn't have invited from the beginning, is that the motivation, the drive, the attitude of the profile in the end. I mean, I had recently a case where someone maybe didn't do perfect on a case study, but the attitude was so great, and the answers of the candidate then to not having done so great on the case, just convince the client anyway that, hey, the attitude is there, the willingness to learn is there, and just the overall drive of the candidate was just more important in the end than actually hitting the technical case.
Cool. So why are we bringing all this up? We want to sort of dig into some of the challenges that we're seeing today, and really around this idea, this concept of equally. Could you maybe highlight, let's say, 3 of the critical challenges that people that bring mandates to you, so the companies, the hiring companies have, and then maybe the 3 of the biggest challenges that the candidates have shared with you?
Mm-hmm. So most of the time, I would say time is one of them, right? The time it takes to do a recruitment is not to be underestimated. The cost, of course, in the end, if you hire the wrong person, if you invested months and months and months of people's time doing interviews and still not having a successful closure of the process, you need then external support potentially to support you and drive the process to an end a little bit quicker. So definitely timing, cost. And I would say in general, just to find, again, amongst the sometimes hundreds of applications, someone that really maybe fits their current situation. I mean, in the end, every recruitment, every company has a specific situation that they're trying to address with a new hire, whether it's a replacement, a new, it doesn't really matter. It's always a situation that someone is going to go into. And many times they have maybe seen some good profiles, but they have not found the one who can fit into that specific situation.
Yep.
So that's, I would say, the three main reasons why they would come then to someone like us to support them on a.
And those challenges really sort of go against each other. So if, on the one hand, you have the companies that they're spending too much money, they're spending too much time, they're still struggling to find the right people, but they can't afford to spend more time to satisfy even more needs of the candidates that want to have more opportunities to present themselves. They want to have more information and more personalized support and more feedback, which would make it even worse. So it's really, it's sort of one of these real challenges where there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and how can you
Absolutely.
how can you solve the problem with those certain number of hours in the day? Awesome. Now let's then open up the whole discussion around digital humans. And we've had lots of discussions around digital humans, dating back, for the last 6 months or so since we first met, on that startup incubator piece. Now, if you think about the role of digital humans, how do you see it creating that space that's missing now between the needs of the candidates and the needs of the hiring companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, maybe to add to that, the recruitment industry is changing. I think technology is just a reality now. So I would be not true to myself if I would say here, like, no, I believe that this will always remain the same and you will always be humans doing everything. I don't believe so. I think now tech is coming, and it's coming very quickly and with a lot of power, if you can say. However, I am still cautious in saying where, because I think we do a fatal mistake, and I think I see it now with a lot of companies. They're just throwing out a lot of products with AI included for recruitment. I mean, I get emails literally every week about, do you want to automatize with AI this or that? And I'm cautious to say, we have a lot of problems in the recruitment process, and we need to look at how do we make the process better overall before we start looking at which tech comes in where I could potentially see, for example, digital humans. I mean, there's a lot of work that we do. And like you said, there's only a couple of hours in the day that we can use. And one of, at least my frustrations as a recruiter, loving to interact with people, I cannot interview every person that crosses my path. It's impossible for me to do. We don't have the capacity. Even if you're a big team, it's difficult to interview every person who is basically looking for a job. So if there could be a way that we were discussing, right? If there could be a way to get people to get that chance to introduce themselves through another channel, and again, I could definitely see a digital human doing that potentially, where they get a chance to really position themselves, answer questions, explain their motivations, what value they bring, and somehow get that opportunity that they wouldn't get today, because it's a reality that most people never get the chance to even have an interview. And again, that's part of the frustrations that I was mentioning before. In the pile of applications, in the volume of applications, you just get sometimes lost, or you just don't get that opportunity because, again, whether we're an external recruiter or an in-house recruiter, you have a limited amount of time. You cannot interview everyone. You pre-select, you narrow it down, you do as much as you can, and then you select based on that. So I could definitely see technology coming in the recruitment process in general. And you have many companies doing now many different things to solve many other recruitment issues in terms of the repetitive tasks, in terms of interview transcriptions, in terms of how can we just make it easier and less time consuming to do many other recruitment tasks. But I think many also are missing the point of view. Many companies we look at, again, time saving possibly for the companies, right? In the end of the clients, I get that. But we forget, what is the experience for the candidate then? What parts are we solving for the candidates too? Because in the end, those are the talents that we want to get to, right? Yeah. So for me, it really needs to be something that yes, will improve the time and cost of hiring in general, but also will ultimately give the candidate a better experience.
Yeah.
And I could see that happening with, for example, a digital human where it will look like a real person, sound like a real person, do an interview, get the key things that someone will probably get on the phone nowadays anyway, standardized, and, a couple of questions that you want to have to get to know the person a bit before you invite them for an actual interview. Instead of maybe having that phone call, why not give the opportunity to more and have it maybe through a digital human? I can see that happening, for example. Definitely.
Yeah.
And
I remember looking through some statistics, and none of the statistics completely agree. But if we look at corporate organizations, so, typically, if I read right, it's somewhere between 100 and 1,000 CVs coming in for every job posting. But I think it was like typically around 200 or something like that. And from the 200, you need one person. So
correct.
it's 0.5%. It's almost your chances when you send it in, they're almost zero.
Mhm.
And for the hiring person, I mean, it's a nightmare if you try and do anything really too personalized, because, how many weeks are you prepared to spend to just hire this one job? And I think, and this would be the question, is a CV already going to be good enough to knock out half of the people? Maybe, but maybe today we'll use the CV to knock out 90% of the people.
Correct.
Which means that there's a lot of people that have, probably the skills and capabilities, maybe some of the studies, maybe some of the experience, but overall, let's say good enough to have at least the first thing, that's the first interaction perhaps. But you're
Correct.
still talking, even if it's 50% or 40% or 30% of the 200 or more, that's still 60 phone calls, 60 meetings to organize. It's a lot of work. So,
Absolutely.
is
And
there a
keep
way
in
to go
mind,
from, yeah,
oh, sorry, and keep in mind that you normally never have one process only. Sometimes again, maybe a small company that recruits once every now and then, but generally speaking, an in-house recruiter or an external recruiter like we all have multiple processes at the same time. You don't handle just one. So that multiplied on top. So already looking at the chances of 1 out of 200, but then multiply that to 6, 7. Sometimes I know internal recruiters have 12, 20 positions at once. I mean, it's really insane the amount of work actually recruiters have. So
yeah,
then you multiply that on top and you realize that what with the hours that you have, it's literally impossible, basically, today, at least.
yep, yeah. So let's dig into this use case just a little bit more. So, what would it be able to do? So we're talking about a use case of a digital human that is able to, set a meeting with someone, person turns up, give a nice introduction, give them the opportunity to maybe ask questions about the company, about the role, have answers ready at hand. Then, move into maybe some standard high level questions. But then even, you could almost combine that initial high level interview, like that high level phone call that you do with that actual first sort of interview that you might
Correct.
reserve for 10 of those 200 people, where you actually go one step deeper and you start sort of challenging them on maybe how they think about certain things. Do they have the right approach? Do they have the right behaviors to, work in that specific environment that might be challenging for one reason or the other? Much more than just, have you done A, B, and C, but really
Mhm.
understanding how people solve certain problems, and do
Correct.
they have what it takes? So that would be the, let's just say, the live conversational part. What would you imagine you then do with this information that you've got a recording, you maybe have a transcription, but what do you now do with this in order to actually save time?
I mean, it would be one that you have already, hopefully, because normally companies say, okay, we will contact you for future opportunities, blah, 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 even though you never got a chance to speak, right? So I would say it would be a great opportunity for companies to really have actual data on the candidates and their performance
Mhm.
already beforehand and
You mean
being
the
able,
candidate is happy to have
of
their data
course,
stored
of
for a
course,
future
that,
offer? I think
yes.
that we have to say right up front.
Yes, absolutely. And that's maybe where my concern always comes in. Again, looking back to the candidate experience, and I'm not a tech person, never pretend to be. So I'm saying it very humbly. How I mean, what feeling will the person get in that interview, right? I mean, is there somehow that feeling of, and it will never replace the human emotions and the human empathy and so on and warmth, hopefully that we still can bring as humans, but that it still makes sense and that it's not just like a chatbot answering black and white questions. I think it's evolving to a point where you can do much, much more. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at least what I understood
No,
from you.
absolutely.
So it's really evolving to do much more. So I think if the candidate can also get some of their questions answered, because I always say that for me, an interview is a two-way street. The candidate is asking about the company and should get to know the company equally as the company is getting to know the candidate. So maybe in that first instance, the person can also get answers to many of the questions that they will have in the process or in the company, right? At the same time, get information. Again, it could be about the salary, it could be about the culture of the company. There can be many aspects that they can be getting information of. But if that comes into play, it needs to be also where the candidate feels it's somehow a conversation, knowing again that it's recorded, that it's not a human behind the screen in the end, but that it gives at least the feeling of having someone that is still understanding what you're saying and maybe having a question on what you're saying, right? So that it's really a conversation somehow with this real human.
Mhm.
I think that would be key. And again, provided, of course, that candidates then with GDPR and everything are okay, that this reporting remains at the company potentially, right, for a period of time and that they can access it later on for another process. And I think for the company then to pre-select candidates, they could, look at some of the answers, maybe through a transcript and see, okay, these answers kind of go hand in hand with what we're looking for. Maybe even they can see snippets of parts. Or maybe, I don't know, let's say a company is looking for a manager. Maybe they can specify leadership traits on the interview and see maybe the video of how the candidate was answering those questions. There's many ways I
Uh,
think it can be used.
I think, so let's start. There's sort of two bits that you mentioned. So one is like, what's the power of a digital human conversation versus a chatbot or
Yeah.
a document or whatever? And I think the first one is, what do you share about a company? I mean, you could say, could you tell me more about your company, about certain aspects, but there's actually, if you wanted to do the research about the company, there's huge amounts usually, especially for a corporate, but almost too much. So having this chat capability allows you to get just the information that's important to you. I think that's a
Yes.
critical piece. And then there's also this thing of people are also willing to share more data with a digital human than they are with, let's say, a real human. And I think it also works both ways. People are also more willing to ask stupid questions to, questions they're embarrassed about or they don't feel comfortable about. They're more open to asking those questions to a digital human than they are a real person, because it feels like a much safer space. So I think that works in both ways. So having that digital human creates that safe environment that they can actually ask questions that might be important to them. And in some cases, that's the only way that a digital human is typically better than a real human, is giving that, that actually, even though we talk about data security and all that, people actually feel like it's a much safer space. So that's the first piece. And then the second part was, what do you now do with this stored data? So one of them is you can actually, instead of doing a search and getting a profile on LinkedIn, you actually, or even if, let's say, somebody's done a video recording of themselves, and we haven't even talked about that aspect yet. You know, people could do a video recording or answer questions. I've been in one of those interviews. I absolutely hated it.
Me too.
Where you
I actually
record a
stopped the
re-record.
process. Yeah, I
You
decided
okay?
not to. I decided not to apply when the application was a video, and not that I have anything against being in front of a camera, but it just felt wrong, and it felt like that doesn't really say anything about me. And I also felt, honestly, because as I said, I'm very keen on that diversity aspect as well and inclusion. For me, was also, I mean, the way you're judging someone, how good they are in front of a camera. I mean, you have many people that are very introverted and shy, and they would not maybe perform extremely well in front of the camera, and they're absolutely outstanding professionals. So for me, the whole process was off-putting, and I actually didn't apply to that company back then because they had I had to basically keep to myself. So I mean, if I would have a conversation with someone, at least somehow I would probably feel more comfortable. But it was really, you have questions and you record yourself, and you can do it over and over again, which is fine. But I just felt it was so unnatural and just felt not. I mean, maybe for some marketing job, social media people, I get it. And that's probably the best way to maybe hire someone.
Yeah,
Via
absolutely.
TikTok and other channels for sure. But I think again, in my case, I was like, I don't see how this could be,
Yeah.
defining and thinking of other candidates again that maybe are not so comfortable in front of the camera. What is the impact of their application then if it's via a video?
Yeah. And so converting that into a conversation, which is continuous, it's not about being perfect. It's about having questions. It's much more, not much more human. And looking at another human also makes that experience much more natural again. I think these things all sort of,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of science also behind it, a lot of research that's been done, where having a face that looks like a real person, in particular, mouth, eyes, so that part of the face, as
Mm-hmm.
long as this part of the face is working well, it's actually good enough. So if you have a decent human looking avatar and these things are working, then you actually get a pretty good conversation. People feel quite natural with it. And even if you have a real video with a person, but you have distortion and this part of the face
Mm-hmm.
is not working properly, there's a lot of discomfort in that conversation. So
Yeah.
in some cases, you're better off having a digital human where the eyes, the mouth, the facial features are working basically right, versus having some kind of a distorted, delayed conversation by video with a real person. So that was
Yeah.
interesting. That this type of research that's coming out now.
Yeah.
Um, you can have a normal, natural conversation. The bits, the information gets collected. And then when people do their search, instead of getting your LinkedIn profile, they actually will get snippets of the conversation and how it went, maybe the summaries of those bits, how well maybe you performed. So you could also think about having some kind of performance metrics based on structure, speed of response,
Mm-hmm.
quality of answer, and so on. And then you could also get snippets of that particular part where someone did particularly well or maybe less well on a particular theme. So I could imagine, like you said, you could actually very quickly review 100 candidates, do the search, or 1,000. You might have 10,000 candidates or more, and it pulls out the top 10, 20, 30 based on these conversations. Um, and then you can actually just zone in, like zoom into some of those
Yeah.
snippets which are relevant to the things that you're looking at, so that you can maybe once again reduce the number of people that you speak to and end up with that top handful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in the end, I mean, all of the, I mean, I'm very interested in the topic of AI and what is coming also from a recruitment point of view. Been listening to plenty of podcasts and following a lot of articles and research and all of that. And again, that's what I'm saying. I see many companies jumping on it without really maybe thinking of the implications that they could mean. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot of things that can be done to improve the process and to improve the overall experience. And I think in this case, again, potentially giving the opportunity to more people to get that chance to introduce themselves, which is today, I think, definitely an issue. Again, provided that everyone is in agreement of the information, the data shared, and so on. I do believe there's an interesting case, and I do believe that in recruitment, it's coming either way. Where in the process it will end up being successful, that's going to be, I think, the question. I feel, like I said, many companies are jumping on it blindly now without really knowing. And I'm someone that you know a little bit by now that I'm very fact oriented, so I want to have a lot of facts and sources from all the facts before saying anything or making a statement. I'm very cautious because I believe there's a huge responsibility behind it as well. So I don't want to throw out
Absolutely.
certain things that I don't know for sure, that I haven't done my own research on. But I can clearly see that the way the tech is evolving right now is insane. And I believe that it's evolving to a speed where people don't know. And probably we need also education in that sense, right? Because I think when people maybe hear digital human, we don't really know what it means. I mean, again, like I told you, I'm not a tech person. So for me, I got to know it through you when we did the course, right? And now it's super exciting. So I think also getting to know more what it does and what it doesn't do, and maybe also have that kind of disclaimer for the interview somehow that, hey, what this will do and what it will not do. I think that will be very important. And I think that people also understand how it really works and what's behind and what is the advantage maybe for, again, for me, maybe as a candidate, would it be a benefit for me to have a digital human having that first screening or not? And again, that's always something that with facts and with probably some test cases, you could figure that out. But I do believe there's definitely potential. And if I may add, I'm even thinking, a lot of candidates struggle with interviewing in general, right? How do you interview? How do you come across? Many worked for a company for 15 years, never did an interview outside, and suddenly they're facing the reality of I have to interview. So, for example, to do mock interviews, why couldn't digital humans then be that kind of, now I'm going into learning and development in a certain degree, but in general for candidates, for example, to have kind of mock interviews, maybe get some feedback after their interview, how they answer different questions. That could also be another user case potentially. And then if you look at
Let's stop on this one because I think this is super interesting. So you talk about the mock interview. We've now turned it around. So we have, you create the capabilities to have a real interview, but of course you can then turn around and say, well, let's switch off the analytics feed that you would get and share that with a particular supplier or company that's looking to hire people. And you say, okay, let's turn this around, and it's a solution to coach people to improve their interviews, and interviewed by different people with different personalities, focusing on different things, asking different questions. Could be super interesting. And then switching on that analytics that would tell them, hey, how does it come across?
Correct.
Do people listen to what you're saying, and will they be more likely to hire you or not? And I think some that AI would be quite difficult to do, but at least it would be relatively lower risk because it's only meant to support the individual.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take the AI that you might be applying, let's say to evaluate somebody's interview, you start running up against, responsible AI and the new EU regulation. I think hiring is one of those elements which are considered high risk. So not the really dangerous, should never be used, but one of the high risk ones that need to be very carefully managed.
Yes.
And for good reason.
Yes.
I think that's coming out end of this year, early next year. So anything that's getting built now and things that have already been built in the past are maybe going to have to be completely rebuilt in order to meet these requirements. I think that's probably a good thing. But how do you make sure you build these in such a way that they are unbiased, that they, are effective? The sad truth is they probably will have to be 10 times better than a human. We all know that we're all very biased. I think that's an assumption. We have to just, we don't even know how biased we are. It's the fact. And it's okay. But when you're talking about AI, then there's the expectation that you are not just less biased than a human, but like 10 times less biased. Just like if you have a self-driving car, it doesn't have to be safer than the average human. It has to be like 10 times safer. Otherwise, people are just not going to accept that change.
No.
I think these are
and it was proven in recruitment before that I think it was Amazon that was using some facial recognition and things like that. I think also in recruitment, and they had to basically take a step back and stop using it because it was proven that it was rejecting candidates if they came from certain areas in the US, in New York, and they were just not getting interviews based on, again, names. And basically the same biases that humans have, probably elevated a little bit with AI. So, and that's what I was saying earlier. I'm very cautious, and I do believe that tech has a very important place in recruitment and in HR. But I think it's such a delicate area that I think because you're dealing with people's, in the end, livelihood to a certain degree, right? So I think it's important that it's done very responsibly and that all, again, tested, tried, and again, not keeping in mind only one side, but really implementing the tech in a way that it benefits both sides, clients and candidates, and the experience of both to make those connections the best way.
Which the video interviews, at least my experience was, definitely didn't do. And we talked about this like interview training piece. I would break it down into like 3 key elements now. So you have a digital interview, which is just doing that job and collecting some of the information and structuring it, allowing people to do search and see snippets, based on the different topics that are being discussed. We then have, mock interviews. And I think
Yes.
these mock interviews can be done in both ways. It could be training people to do a better interview, but it could also be to train interviewers to do a better interview.
Yes. It's a good
Particularly how
point.
to manage difficult candidates or candidates with different backgrounds and, mentally, get them to train and practice and maybe change behaviors if needed. And then the third one is this interview coaching. And I would say it's taking an element of that digital interview that we first started with and that kind of assessment, but you could probably do a lot more in terms of this reviewing the interview, providing, really good, high quality structured feedbacks to the interviewer and interviewee, both, in fact.
Yes.
Um, you know, share of time talking. Is someone talking too much? Are they listening enough? Are they interrupting? I think there's accuracy of answers, length of answers. These kinds of things could be, I think, really well structured and reviewed and evaluated.
Yes.
And which elements are they showing? Are they showing elements of, being highly motivated? Are they showing elements of clear communication? Are they showing elements of being uncertain, unsure, humor? I don't know. Maybe we could start to bring out some of these elements as well.
Yeah, and that would I think be the key, right? Because I think that's where still maybe the human part can come in, right? If you feel comfortable with a person interviewing you, you tend to be more yourself, and then you show normally yourself as is. And I always say you have to join a company based on who you are, because playing a role, whether in the interview or at the company later, it's probably one of the reasons for the mental health issues we're having, right? That people are not comfortable with themselves at work. So if you can be fully yourself, and I think that's where with again, if you have the right human interaction with a real human, you probably can be more yourself, you can be vulnerable, you can be authentic, and you can position yourself as you are and hopefully find that match of company that will accept you how you are. And I think if the digital human managed to somehow, from a technical point of view, and again, I don't know enough to say that we're there at the moment with the tech, but if that could be the case where they can really get proper and good feedback to improve on certain aspects, then I think it could be really, really a benefit for the candidates. And again, the same with the clients. If they can get better at interviewing, they might also attract more talent in that way.
Well, and I think with that, we've actually carved out three really interesting use cases and really practical. And I kind of like the fact that they're all practical. They could all be standalone, but they could all also be almost combined, because you could reuse so many of these different elements in different ways. So you sort of, create a system that can, it's like a pocket knife almost, that would be able to help in this situation, that situation, help in that situation, help you, search for candidates that you might have already interviewed in the past, help you rapidly interview new candidates, help you to be more inclusive, in a more wholesome way, based on actual people's actual skills and capabilities, not just on their CV, provide training for people and also to provide feedback. I think really beautiful examples. Now, what would be your final words then, to either candidates or organizations that might be thinking about heading in this direction?
Yeah, I would say to do it responsibly. I'm still again cautious about the implications and what it means for people in general and how they're being evaluated. And now maybe to add that I don't believe just applying tech here and there will solve the problems with recruitment. So I think the recruitment itself needs to do a little bit of a reshuffle, and we need to probably rethink in general how we're recruiting people. And then I think the tech will help us for sure to enhance it and to do it better. So I believe that we go very hand in hand. We need to just find the right ways and the right places to incorporate the tech so that it doesn't harm people in the end, because I think that's the main concern that most will have. So to really do it cautiously, to again do a lot of research. I mean, again, me being a little bit fact-based, I would like to have a lot of research behind all the statements and things. I think we have three great examples, and I would be curious to see, how this could be applied potentially. But I would say, yeah, we need to do it in a responsible manner and make sure that we cover. There are many angles to cover, and I think we underestimate sometimes how much we have to keep in mind for this to be successful, right? So I would definitely say to be open for the tech, to embrace it because it's here to stay, but to do it responsibly.
Yeah. And to fit it into the process, it's a people process at the end of the day. So it can help the people process. It can make it more efficient. It can provide a lot of leverage. But at the end of the day, it still has to be a human process on both sides. So how do we leverage the tech inside the process and
Correct.
make it more human and more enjoyable and more positive experience for all people? So, well, look, thank you on that positive note. Really appreciate you coming in today, Evelyn, and let's keep this conversation going.
This was the Real Digital Humans podcast. Please like, follow or subscribe to hear more.